While visiting a crumbling apartment building, Keanu Reeves hears a teenaged girl playing Chopin flawlessly. But she doesn't know the truth. Her gift comes from a father she was taught to forget. And what Keanu does next will uncover a secret buried in silence for years. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The building smelled of old paint and rain. Keanu Reeves pulled his jacket tighter around him as he stepped through the cracked entryway, the sound of his boots echoing against the worn tile floor. He wasn't here for fame, cameras, or another event where people lined up for photos. This was different. He was visiting a struggling community for a charity shoot, hoping to shine a light on the places most people forgot. The building creaked with every step as he made his way up the narrow stairwell. Peeling wallpaper curled away from the walls like tired hands, and water stains ran like rivers along the ceiling. But as Keanu reached the second-floor landing, he froze. Hear what? Music? Not the casual hum of a radio or the plinking of a hobbyist. Real music. Chopin's Nocturne, delicate and powerful, spilling into the hallway from behind a battered door marked 3B. Keanu stood still, listening. Whoever was playing wasn't just skilled. They were feeling it. Each note carried something raw, something almost too honest to describe. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound. Through the narrow crack where the door hadn't fully closed, he caught a glimpse. A teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, sat hunched over a battered upright piano. Her long dark hair fell in front of her face, and her fingers, small and calloused, danced across chipped keys with a tenderness that stole the breath from Keanu's chest. She wasn't reading from sheet music. She didn't need to. She played as if the notes were etched into her bones, as if the music had lived there long before she had ever touched a piano. Keanu found himself leaning in, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, something like recognition, something like sorrow. Before he could gather the nerve to knock, the last note lingered in the hallway like a whispered goodbye. The girl sat back, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her eyes closed. Keanu pulled away, giving her privacy. He stepped quietly down the hallway, where he spotted an older man fiddling with a cracked mailbox labeled Superintendent. The man looked up at him warily. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice rough from years of cigarettes and city dust. Keanu smiled gently. "I'm with the charity team, just here to look around." The man relaxed a little. He nodded toward the door where the music had come from. "You heard her, didn't you?" Keanu's smile softened. "I did." The superintendent chuckled dryly. "That's Elena. Lives there with her grandmother. Hardly ever comes out. Just that piano, day and night." Keanu's heart tightened. "She's talented," he said quietly. The man shrugged. "Bored with it, I guess. No lessons. No money for that stuff." Keanu glanced back toward apartment 3B. There was something about the way she played. Something that said the music wasn't just a skill. It was a lifeline. And somehow, he knew this wasn't the last time he'd hear it. He unlingered near the stairwell, the sound of that last note still clinging to the dusty air. It wasn't just skill that girl had. It was something much rarer. It was as if her heart had found a language no one had ever taught her, and it had chosen piano keys to speak. The superintendent returned to sorting through the mail, shaking his head. "Kid's been here since she was small," he said. "After her mom passed, Grandma took her in. Keeps to herself, doesn't cause trouble." Keanu nodded, still half lost in thought. "Does anyone else hear her play?" he asked. The man chuckled. "Only the walls, I guess. Neighbors complain sometimes about the noise, but most of them just listen. It's not bad noise, you know? It's different. Feels like it belongs here." Keanu smiled faintly at that. Something about the building, the peeling walls, the battered mailboxes, the tired hum of the lights, felt less heavy with that music pouring through it. "Has she ever played anywhere else? School concerts, community events?" Keanu asked. The superintendent shook his head firmly. "Nope. Grandma's real protective. Doesn't trust the world much. Can't blame her. Really. Keanu's heart ached a little at those words. A girl with that much talent, hidden away behind a cracked door. Her music echoing off tired walls and no one to hear it but the peeling paint and the sagging ceilings. It didn't seem fair. It didn't seem right. He thanked the superintendent and moved slowly down the hall, careful not to make any noise that would disturb the fragile peace inside apartment 3B. When he reached the lobby again, Sophia was waiting, holding a clipboard filled with notes about the shoot. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing the look on his face. Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, "better than okay." He glanced back toward the stairwell one last time. "There's someone, up there. We should remember." Sophia followed his gaze, curious but trusting. "Maybe we can come back," she offered. Keanu nodded, a small smile forming. "Yeah, I think we have to." They stepped outside into the chill afternoon air. The city bustled around them, horns blaring, people rushing past, all unaware that in apartment 3B, a hidden symphony was unfolding. Keanu slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and started walking, his mind still full of those fragile, fearless notes. There was a story behind that door. He could feel it. And somehow, he knew it wasn't just about music. And it was about something lost, something waiting to be found. And if there was one thing Keanu had learned through all his journeys and quiet rescues, it was this. Some songs were too important to leave unheard. Some melodies were meant to find their way into the world, even if they had to travel through broken halls and forgotten places to get there. The next day, Keanu couldn't shake the music from his mind. During the charity shoot, between setting up interviews and posing for photographs, his thoughts kept drifting back to the girl in apartment 3B. The way her fingers had moved across the keys, not with polished technique but with raw emotion, haunted him. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. And somehow, that truth had wrapped itself around his heart and refused to let go. Later that afternoon, when the final event wrapped up, Keanu found himself standing at the base of the same cracked stairwell again. The building was quieter now. No hurried footsteps. No shouting neighbors. Just the hum of an old light fixture buzzing faintly overhead. He made his way back up to the second floor. No music drifted out this time. Just silence. Keanu hesitated outside apartment 3B. He wasn't sure what he would say. Wasn't sure if he even had the right to knock. But before he could decide, the door creaked open slightly, and a woman's face peeked out. Older, with sharp eyes softened by time, she looked him over carefully. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. Keanu gave her his gentlest smile. "My name's Keanu," he said. "I heard your granddaughter playing piano yesterday. She's remarkable." The woman's expression tightened for a moment, suspicion flashing across her features. Then, slowly, she opened the door wider. "I'm Rosa," she said, "Elena's grandmother." Keanu nodded politely. "I'm working with a local charity," he explained. "We're trying to spotlight talents and hidden stories in the community. I couldn't help but notice your granddaughter's music. It's extraordinary." Rosa's hand tightened slightly on the doorknob. "She doesn't play for crowds," she said, almost defensively. "She plays for herself." "I understand," Keanu said gently. "And I'm not here to push her. I just wanted you both to know someone heard her, and it mattered." Rosa studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she stepped back. "You can come in for a minute," she said. But she's shy and proud. Keanu followed her into the small, cluttered apartment. The place was filled with the scent of old books and something warm cooking on the stove. In the corner, the battered upright piano sat against the wall, worn but proud, a few keys chipped, the wood scratched by years of use. And there, perched on the piano bench, was Elena. She turned when they entered, her expression wary but curious. Keanu offered a small nod. "Hi," he said simply. Elena didn't answer, but her fingers hovered over the keys as if uncertain whether to shield herself with music or face him head-on. Rosa patted Elena's shoulder gently. "This is the man who heard you yesterday," she said softly. Elena looked at Keanu with eyes too old for her years, eyes that had learned to expect disappointment but still carried a spark of something unbroken. Keanu smiled warmly. "You play beautifully," he said. Elena shrugged, half embarrassed. "I just play," she murmured. Keanu shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You tell stories." A few days later, Keanu returned. This time, he didn't come alone. Sophia walked beside him, carrying a bag filled with fresh fruit, some notebooks, and a few art supplies the foundation often donated to families they met. Keanu figured it might ease the first few minutes of awkwardness. The stairwell groaned under their footsteps, but the familiar notes of piano didn't greet them this time. It was silent. When they knocked, it took a full minute before the door creaked open. Rosa stood there, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. Keanu offered a gentle smile. "We brought some things for you and Elena," he said, motioning toward the bag Sophia carried. Rosa hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. They entered the apartment, the same warmth of spices and old books filling the air. Elena was sitting cross-legged on the couch, flipping through a tattered music theory book that looked at least 20 years old. She glanced up shyly but didn't say anything. Keanu placed the fruit basket on the small kitchen table while Sophia knelt and pulled out colored pencils and a new music notebook. "For you," Sophia said softly, setting them down near Elena. The girl's eyes lit up for a brief moment before she tucked the emotion away carefully, like folding a precious piece of paper she wasn't sure she could trust yet. Rosa sat down heavily in a wooden chair, the towel still clutched in her lap. "You didn't have to do all this," she said gruffly, though her voice lacked real resistance. Keanu sat across from her, giving Elena space. "We wanted to," he said simply. There was a long pause. Finally, Rosa sighed and leaned back in her chair. "You're curious about her," she said, voice low. Keanu didn't deny it. "Her music," he said gently. "It's not just good. It's rare." Rosa's eyes softened a little. "She taught herself," she said. "No lessons, no teachers, just found her way to it one day." Keanu nodded, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. "She listens to recordings sometimes," Rosa added, "when we can get old CDs from the thrift shop. Listens until she can play it." Elena's head tilted slightly, hearing her story told aloud. "That takes a special kind of ear," Sophia said, smiling warmly at Elena. The girl offered the smallest, shyest smile back. Keanu's gaze drifted around the apartment. Among the cluttered shelves and picture frames, something caught his eye. A photograph, tucked behind an old ceramic vase. He leaned closer. It was a younger man, standing proudly next to a piano, holding up a small trophy with a bashful grin. The frame was dusty, the photo slightly faded, but the pride in the man's face was unmistakable. Keanu glanced back at Rosa. "Is that her father?" he asked softly. Rosa's face stiffened immediately. The warmth in her eyes vanished behind a shudder of old pain. "We don't talk about him," she said, her voice sharp, final. Elena's fingers tightened slightly around the edges of her music book, but she said nothing. The room filled with a tense kind of silence, heavy and unspoken. Keanu didn't push. He had learned, through years of encounters like this, that sometimes the best way to earn trust was simply to let silence sit there long enough to feel safe. Sophia shifted gently, drawing attention back to Elena. "Do you have a favorite piece you like to play?" she asked, her voice light and curious. Elena hesitated, then shrugged one shoulder. "I like Chopin," she said quietly, "and Debussy, but sometimes I just make things up." Keanu smiled. "That's the best kind of music." Elena looked at him, uncertain if he meant it. But something in his tone, something easy and sure, seemed to settle her nerves a little. She nodded. "I don't always get it right," she admitted. "Music, isn't about getting it right, Keanu said. It's about telling the truth. Rosa's gaze softened again, but the tightness around her mouth remained. She stood and moved toward the small kitchen, fiddling with a teapot that didn't need fiddling. After a moment, her voice floated back toward them. Her mother, she said, almost to herself, was the sweetest soul. Keanu leaned in, listening carefully. He loved music too. Rosa nodded. Not like Elena. She loved to dance, to laugh. She met him at some concert when she was young. He was brilliant, everyone said so. Rosa's hand tightened around the teapot handle. But brilliance, she said bitterly, doesn't always mean goodness. Elena's eyes dropped to her lap. Sophia reached out and gently placed a notebook closer to her, inviting her to draw or write if she wanted to. Rosa continued, voice tight. Hell was a pianist. Toured for a while. Had a reputation. Not all of it good. Keanu stayed quiet, letting her speak at her own pace. When Elena was just a baby, things went bad. Real bad. He made choices. Hurt a lot of people. Hurt her mother most of all. Keanu could hear the years of anger, of protection etched into every syllable. Rosa turned around, her face lined but fierce. I promised my daughter I'd raise Elena safe. Away from him. Away from that life. Keanu nodded. I understand. Rosa's shoulders sagged a little, as if the weight of all those years had finally found a voice and exhausted her. I didn't want her to inherit any of it, she said. Not the pain, not the disappointment, not him. Elena sat very still on the couch, her hands pressed together tightly. Keanu's heart twisted. He understood Rosa's fear. He even understood her decision. But looking at Elena, he also knew something else. You can't erase where someone comes from. You can only help them understand it. Maybe even heal it. Sophia smiled gently. Sometimes, she said, the best parts of a person survive, even when everything else falls apart. Rosa looked at Elena, her eyes shining with something caught between fear and fierce love. Maybe, just maybe, the music wasn't a curse. Maybe it was the best part of a story still waiting to be rewritten. Keanu sat back slightly, giving Rosa space to breathe through the memories she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Elena traced circles on the edge of the notebook Sophia had given her, the silence pressing down like heavy snow. Keanu spoke softly. Sometimes, he said, we inherit more than blood. We inherit dreams, strength, pieces of people who loved us even when they didn't know how to stay. Rosa watched him, suspicion softening into a wary understanding. I see it when she plays, Keanu continued. She's not just playing notes. She's telling a story she doesn't even know she knows. Elena's head lifted slightly, her eyes meeting his. You mean my own story? She asked. Keanu smiled gently. Maybe. Or maybe the story of someone who loved music the same way you do. Rosa sank into the chair again, exhausted by truths she could no longer protect Elena from. She folded the kitchen towel carefully in her lap, as if tidying something inside herself. I just wanted her to be free, she whispered, not chained to old mistakes. You didn't fail her, Sophia said quietly. You gave her a safe place to grow. And her music, Keanu added, that's hers now, not anyone else's. Elena sat a little taller. Was he really a musician? She asked, her voice trembling at the edge of hope. Rosa hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Could play anything, she said. Could make a piano sound like it was breathing. Keanu's throat tightened. He thought of Elena the first time he had heard her, the way her fingers found the heartbeat inside the music. It wasn't just talent, it was memory. A connection passed down through years, through loss, through silence. Is that why I can do it? Elena asked, almost to herself. Even without lessons? Rosa reached across the table and cupped Elena's hand in hers. It's because you have a gift, she said firmly. "A gift that belongs to you now. No one can take that away." Elena blinked fast, struggling with the emotion rising inside her. Keanu watched her carefully, sensing a delicate shift. This wasn't just a girl who needed an opportunity. This was a girl standing at the edge of a bridge she didn't know she had the right to cross. A bridge built by hands she had been taught to forget. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said gently. "Just know, the music you play, it's yours. And if you ever want to know more, we'll help you find the answers." Elena nodded slowly, her eyes shining but steady. For the first time, she didn't look afraid of her own story. She looked ready. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday soon, she would sit at that battered upright piano and play not just what she had learned, but who she truly was. And when she did, the music would finally come home. Later that evening, Keanu sat alone at his desk, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The world outside his window buzzed with the low hum of the city, but here, inside, everything felt still. He opened his laptop and logged into the Foundation's private forum, a place where stories and hearts collided without judgment. He thought about Elena, about Rose's fierce protection, about the haunting way Elena's fingers spoke truths she didn't even know she carried. The world deserved to know stories like hers. Not the details, not the names, those belonged to Elena alone. But the feeling, the miracle of hidden gifts blooming in unexpected places. Keanu's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before he began typing. He crafted the post carefully, respectfully. "Today I met a young girl who plays piano with the kind of soul that can't be taught. She never had lessons, never had anyone guide her, but her music carries something deeper, something almost inherited. Her family history is complicated. Some doors are still closed, but watching her play made me wonder, how many of us are carrying gifts we didn't even know were left for us, by someone we barely knew?" He sat back and read the words again. Simple, honest, no drama, just an invitation. Beneath it, he added the comment prompt. "Have you ever discovered a hidden talent you didn't know you inherited?" He clicked post. Then he closed the laptop gently and leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet settle. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe the world was too noisy, too busy to hear stories like Elena's anymore. But by the time he made a cup of tea and came back to the screen 15 minutes later, the replies had already started pouring in. Hundreds. From strangers around the world. Stories of inherited gifts, lost talents, family mysteries. One woman wrote about finding her mother's old journals after her death and realizing her own love of poetry had roots she had never known. A man described picking up a guitar at 25 after years of thinking he had no musical skill, only to find his fingers knew things his mind didn't. Later learning his grandfather had been a traveling folk musician. A teenager shared about building furniture in woodshop class, feeling an unexplained pull toward carpentry, only to discover his great-grandfather had been a master craftsman. Story after story unfolded across the screen, weaving together like a tapestry of unseen threads, connecting people to the ones who had come before them. Keanu read each one carefully, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about glory. It was about remembering. Keanu scrolled further, letting each story settle before moving to the next. One post, simple and almost easy to miss, caught his eye. He had read, "My father was a musician. I never met him. Mom never talked about him. I thought music wasn't in me. But one day I touched a piano, and it felt like shaking hands with a memory. Music runs deeper than blood. It's memory without words." Keanu read the comment again, slowly this time. Memory without words. The phrase sat heavy in his chest. It was exactly what he had felt standing outside apartment 3B. It was what had stopped him in his tracks. What had told him that Elena's music was not just hers? It was an echo of something older, something reaching for her from the places she had never been allowed to see. He leaned back, letting the words settle into the quiet room. Maybe Rosa had tried to protect Elena the only way she knew how. Maybe she believed that cutting off the past would save her granddaughter from pain. But in doing so, she had unknowingly left Elena with a missing piece. First song half finished, a story half told. Keanu tapped the edge of his cup thoughtfully. Was it better to leave the past buried? Or to risk reopening old wounds for the chance to heal them properly? He thought about the way Elena had sat at the piano, the way her hands had moved, not searching for applause, not chasing perfection, but chasing connection. She was reaching for something she couldn't name. Maybe it was time someone helped her find it. Keanu turned back to the forum, reading more replies. A teacher spoke of a young girl who could paint vivid landscapes without ever having left the city. Later, the teacher learned the girl's grandfather had been a famous landscape artist, though she had never known him. Another post told of a boy who loved the sea, who built intricate model ships with precision and passion, only to discover, after a DNA test, that he came from a long line of shipbuilders he had never been told about. The more Keanu read, the more he understood. Talent was never just talent. It was memory. It was longing. It was love, passed invisibly from one generation to the next. Even when families fractured, even when shame silenced stories, the gifts endured, waiting for someone brave enough, open enough, to pick them up and carry them forward. Keanu closed his laptop slowly. He sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet room around him. He thought of Elena, of Rose, of the man in the faded photograph holding a piano trophy with awkward pride. There was a story here that hadn't been finished, a song that hadn't been sung, and something inside Keanu told him he couldn't just walk away from it. Not yet. The next morning, Keanu found himself sitting on a park bench with a notebook in hand. The city buzzed around him. The hum of buses, the chatter of early risers, the distant bark of a dog, but he barely noticed. He was writing. Not a song, not a script, just thoughts. Fragments of memory from the comments he had read. Stories of hidden talents waiting quietly to be discovered. Of gifts wrapped not in paper, but in DNA and dreams. He wrote down the comment that had stayed with him most. Music runs deeper than blood. It's memory without words. Keanu underlined it twice. He thought of Elena, of how her fingers knew melodies her mind couldn't yet explain, of how her heart reached for something she had never been taught, but somehow always knew. And he thought of Daniel Morgan, the man in the photograph, whom Rosa had buried beneath silence and fear, a man who, by all accounts, had lost his way. But maybe not everything he had left behind was broken. Maybe, just maybe, the best part of him had survived. In Elena's hands, in her music, in the way her head tilted slightly when she lost herself in a piece, just like a young musician caught mid-formenter in that old photograph. Keanu closed the notebook carefully. It was time to find out more. Not to expose, not to judge, but to understand. Because Elena deserved more than half a story. She deserved the whole truth. Not just about where her gift came from, but about the man who had hoped, even from the edges of her life, that she would find it. Keanu pulled out his phone and called Sophia. "I think we need to look into Daniel Morgan," he said when she picked up. There was a pause on the other end. "You sure you want to dig that up?" Sophia asked gently. Keanu nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Not for me," he said. "For her." Sophia's voice softened. "Okay. I'll start with public records, see what I can find." Keanu hung up and leaned back against the bench, letting the morning sun warm his face. Somewhere, not far from here, Elena was probably sitting at that battered piano, her fingers coaxing magic from broken keys. She didn't know the full story yet. She didn't know how much love and how much pain lived in every note she played. But she would. Keanu would make sure of it. Because sometimes healing didn't come from forgetting. It came from remembering, from piecing together the broken melodies and finding that even in the cracks there was music. Even in the silence, there was still a song waiting to be heard. And sometimes the most important thing wasn't to teach someone how to play. It was to show them they had been playing their truth all along. Sophia worked fast. By the next afternoon, she met Keanu at a small coffee shop tucked between two aging brick buildings, a place where conversations felt safer, a little more hidden from the noise of the city. She slid a manila folder across the table, her expression cautious. Keanu opened it carefully. Inside were sparse but telling records. Daniel Morgan, born 1977, once a professional concert pianist, acclaimed for his emotional performances but known privately, according to old clippings, for struggles with gambling and debts. In 2008, he had been convicted of a nonviolent financial crime, embezzlement tied to an addiction relapse, no violent charges, no repeated offenses after prison, no further public life. It was as if Daniel had stepped off the stage and into silence. Keanu read slowly, absorbing the weight of it. Helm pled guilty, Sophia said quietly. Served 6 years, got out, been under the radar since. Keanu nodded. What about now? Sophia shook her head. No new records. Nothing after 2015. It's like he disappeared. Keanu tapped the file thoughtfully. Or maybe, he said, like he didn't think he deserved to be found. Sophia hesitated, then added, There's one more thing. She pulled a second document from her folder, a scan of a letter. It was never delivered. Prison mail logs show it was sent to Rosa's address, but it was signed, for Elena. Keanu felt his chest tighten as he reached for the printed page. The handwriting was rough, a little shaky, but real. Alive. He read the first line silently. Dear Elena, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you're too young. Maybe they won't give it to you. Maybe I don't deserve for you to hear from me at all. But I wanted you to know, I think about you every day. I dream that one day you'll find a piano, and even if you never know my name, even if you never know my face, I hope you'll know me when your fingers find the keys. Keanu swallowed hard against the lump rising in his throat. Daniel hadn't written to beg forgiveness. He hadn't written to plead his case. He had written because hope, even buried under guilt, still found a way to breathe. He still found a way to sing. Keanu read the next paragraph carefully. I would have taught you how to listen before you played. I would have taught you to trust the silence between the notes, because that's where the heart speaks. Maybe someone else will teach you. Maybe you'll teach yourself. But whatever happens, my music belongs to you. And somewhere inside you, it's already there, waiting. Keanu set the letter down slowly. It wasn't just a father reaching for a daughter. It was a musician reaching for the future he had thrown away, praying it could still be found through her hands. Keanu sat there in silence, the low hum of the coffee shop fading into the background. The letter felt heavier than any file he had read before. He could see Daniel in every line, not the man the world had judged, but the father the world had forgotten. A man who, despite everything, had still dreamed of passing something good forward. Keanu looked up at Sophia. Where did you find this? Sophia sipped her coffee, her eyes sad. The prison archive, she said. It was returned to sender, marked undeliverable. It stayed in their system until it was digitized with the rest of the old mail logs. Keanu shook his head slowly. So Rosa never gave it to Elena. Sophia didn't answer. She didn't have to. Keanu could guess the truth. Fear, pain, protection, they could all look the same from the outside. Rosa must have thought she was shielding Elena from disappointment. from a man she believed could only bring heartbreak. But in doing so, she had hidden something beautiful too. A hope. A bridge that could have been built sooner. A melody Elena had been playing in her bones without even knowing who had written the first notes. Keanu slid the letter back into the folder carefully. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to Elena. But he couldn't just hand it to her either. Not yet. Not without knowing if Daniel still wanted to be found, and if he was ready to be the father he had once dreamed of being. Keanu sat back in his chair, the decision heavy but clear. He would find Daniel. He would give him the chance to finish the letter he had started years ago. And if Daniel was willing, truly willing, then maybe Elena could have more than a ghost hidden inside her music. Maybe she could have a father's love, fragile but real, mending itself one note at a time. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed Keanu's hand gently. "Whatever you decide," she said, "you're not doing this alone." Keanu smiled, grateful for her steadiness. He looked down at the final lines of the letter one more time. "Play when you're happy. Play when you're broken. Play because you can. And know that somewhere, somehow, someone once dreamed of hearing your song." Keanu folded the paper with care, treating it not like evidence, but like the relic it was. A father's last prayer, tucked between bars and time and silence. A prayer that had somehow, impossibly, found its way into the hands of the one person who could make it real. Keanu stood up, the decision firm inside him now. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about giving two broken halves of a song a chance to finally find each other. No matter how many wrong notes had come before, there was still time for a new melody to begin. The next morning, Keanu woke early, the weight of the letter still pressing gently against his heart. He couldn't shake the image of Elena's hands on those battered piano keys, the way she played as if she were searching for something. Maybe she had been searching all along. He met Sophia outside the Foundation's office, the two of them walking side by side under a gray sky, the city still yawning itself awake. "We need to find him," Keanu said simply. Sophia nodded without hesitation. "I already started," she said. "There's a small community center a few miles from here that offers music therapy classes for adults rebuilding their lives. Guess who's on the volunteer roster?" Keanu's heart skipped. "Daniel?" Sophia smiled. Listed under his real name. No hiding. Keanu exhaled slowly, feeling the first crack of light break through the long shadow of this story. They drove in quiet focus, the streets blurring past, both of them carrying the same unspoken hope. When they arrived, the community center was a squat, weathered building tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered diner. It didn't look like much, but inside, there was laughter. There was music. There was life. Keanu paused at the door, letting the sounds reach him before stepping inside. Down a narrow hallway, through a cracked open door, he heard the familiar sound of a piano. Not flawless, not flashy, but steady. Yeah, warm, feeling. He and Sophia stood at the threshold, unseen for a moment. At the battered, upright piano, a man sat with his back to them. Graying hair, hunched shoulders, fingers moving across the keys with a tenderness that spoke of someone who had once lost everything and was learning to find his way back. Note: Keanu didn't need to ask. He knew it was Daniel, the man who had written that letter, the man who had prayed for music to be the bridge when words had failed. Keanu waited until the piece ended. Then he stepped forward, careful, respectful. Daniel looked up, startled, his face worn but kind. His eyes held a flicker of something guarded, something that said he didn't expect visitors, and certainly not someone like Keanu Reeves standing in front of him. Keanu offered a small smile. "Mind if I sit?" he asked gently. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. Keanu sat on the bench beside him, feeling the tension in the air like a fragile thread ready to snap. He pulled the folded letter from his pocket and placed it gently on the music stand. Daniel's eyes widened. He stared at it as if it were a ghost. Keanu spoke quietly. "You wrote this for your daughter." Daniel's hands trembled as he reached out, touching the paper but not unfolding it. "I never thought she'd see it," he whispered. Keanu's voice stayed soft. "She hasn't. Not yet." Daniel looked up, pain and hope warring in his face. Keanu met his gaze. "But she still might." And for the first time in years, Daniel Morgan allowed himself to hope. Daniel sat quietly on the worn piano bench, his hands resting in his lap. Keanu stayed beside him, not pushing, giving him space to breathe through the tidal wave of emotion. Outside the small community center, the world moved on, but in here, time had slowed to the fragile pace of healing. "I thought maybe," Daniel said haltingly, "maybe if she ever touched a piano, she'd feel something." He looked at his hands, calloused and lined with time. "I knew I'd never deserve to teach her," he whispered, "but maybe the music would." Keanu listened without interruption. He saw a man not hardened by prison, but broken by regret. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his voice rough. "I used to sit in my cell at night," he said, "and play in my head. Pieces I'd written, pieces I wanted to teach her." His throat tightened. I pictured her hands, small like her mother's, finding the keys, laughing when she got it wrong, grinning when she got it right. He pressed a palm against his forehead. "I never thought I'd actually hear that she played." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You haven't lost everything," he said gently. "She's still here." Daniel shook his head, tears brimming. "She doesn't know me," he said. "She was a baby when they cut me out. All she knows is that I failed." Keanu's voice stayed soft. "All he knows is the music inside her. She doesn't know where it came from yet, but it's there, and it's beautiful." Daniel laughed bitterly, wiping his face. "I don't even know if I'd want her to find out. I don't want her carrying my shame." Keanu considered his words carefully before speaking. "You didn't leave her nothing," he said. "You left her music. You left her the best part of yourself." Daniel slumped forward, elbows on his knees, breathing deep against the weight of guilt. "I just wanted her to have a clean slate," he said, "to build something better than I ever did." Keanu nodded slowly. "And she is." Daniel looked at him, the hint of a desperate hope breaking through. Is she happy?" Keanu smiled gently. "Doesn't sound too heavy to me." "She plays like someone who has hope stitched into every note. She's strong, she's kind, she's finding her way." Daniel's shoulders shook. "I didn't know if it would be enough," he said, "sending my love out into the world through a song she might never hear." Keanu placed a steady hand on his back. "He murdered," he said, "even if she doesn't know it yet." Daniel closed his eyes tightly, overcome. For the first time in years, he realized something he had never dared hope for. Even broken fathers leave behind beautiful things. Even silence, when born from love, can teach. Daniel sat still for a long time, breathing in the truth of Keanu's words. Outside the window, sunlight filtered through the dusty glass, catching the worn edges of the piano and making them shine like gold. "I used to think," Daniel said quietly, "that if I ever saw her again, she'd look at me like a stranger. Or worse, like a mistake." Keanu shook his head slowly. "She didn't have anger in her," he said. "Not in her music, not in her eyes." Daniel let out a shuddered breath. "You don't know how many nights I sat awake," he whispered, "begging God or fate or whatever's out there to let her be free of me, free to become her own person without my shadow hanging over her." He pressed his palms together, knuckles white. "But I hear what you're saying." Keanu leaned forward. "I'm not saying it will be easy," he said. "I'm not even saying she's ready. But if you still love her, and it's clear you do, you owe her one more thing." Daniel looked at him, hollow and hopeful at the same time. "What's that?" "Honesty," Keanu said simply. "Not explanations, not apologies, just the truth. That she wasn't forgotten, that you loved her the only way you could." Daniel bowed his head, emotions spilling over the edges he had tried to hold together for so long. Keanu gave him time. Some wounds needed to be felt all the way through before they could start healing. Finally, Daniel wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt and sat up a little straighter. "I want her to know," he said. His voice cracked, but he didn't shy away from it. "Even if she never wants to meet me, I want her to know I never stopped loving her." Keanu nodded, feeling a quiet surge of hope between them. "Then let's find a way," Keanu said. Daniel looked down at his hands. "Don't have anything to offer her," he said softly. "No house, no money, no real future." Keanu smiled faintly. "You have a song," he said. "You have a letter. You have a heart that never gave up." Daniel blinked hard. "And sometimes," Keanu added, "that's more than enough." For the first time in a long while, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future where his daughter's face wasn't just a memory, where maybe, just maybe, she could know the parts of him that had survived the worst of him, and where maybe they could build something new, not perfect, not easy, but real. Keanu placed a gentle hand on the battered piano beside them. "It started here," he said. "It can start again." Daniel closed his eyes and nodded. He wasn't ready to walk through every door yet, but he was ready to open one. And sometimes, one door was all it took to change a life. That night, Keanu sat with Daniel in the quiet of the community center, the lights dimmed low, the piano between them, like a bridge built out of memory and hope. Daniel rested his fingers lightly on the keys. He didn't play. Not yet. Instead, he stared down at the black and white lines as if they might rearrange themselves into the life he had once imagined but never lived. "How do you even start?" Daniel murmured, more to himself than to Keanu. Keanu answered without hesitation. "You start where you are," he said, "broken or not." Daniel nodded slowly. He tapped a single note, soft and uncertain, then another, and another. It wasn't a song yet, just a reaching, a trembling hand across the silence he had lived in for so long. Keanu closed his eyes and listened. The notes came tentatively at first, like someone remembering how to speak. But then, slowly, they began to weave into something more. A melody, soft, owned it, but alive. Daniel played with his eyes closed, not for an audience, not even for Keanu, but for the memory of a little girl he had rocked to sleep once, years and years ago, before the world had stolen his voice. When he finished, Keanu stayed quiet. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, filled of everything Daniel couldn't say yet, but would find a way to someday. Finally, Daniel looked at him. "Do you think?" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Do you think she'd even want to hear from me?" Keanu thought of Elena's music, of the way she played with her whole heart, even without knowing the story behind the notes. "I think she's already been hearing you," Keanu said gently. "She just didn't know who she was hearing yet." Daniel pressed his hand over his mouth to stifle a sob. Keanu let him. "Some truths broke you before they set you free." Daniel wiped his eyes again and gave a watery laugh. "I'm terrified," he said. Keanu smiled. He said. "Means it matters." They sat in the fading light, two men tied together by nothing but music and a silent promise to do better than the past had allowed. After a while, Daniel picked up the folded letter again. He smoothed the creases with careful fingers. "I want to add something," he said. Keanu nodded. "I'll help you." Daniel looked at the worn piano, then at the door, then back at the letter. "I want her to know," he whispered, "that even if I was lost, she was never lost to me." Keanu felt something break open inside his own chest at those words. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pen, sliding it across the table. "Then tell her," he said. Daniel took the pen with shaking hands, and slowly, deliberately, he began to write. A new ending, a second chance, a song not finished, but finally ready to be played. Keanu sat across from Daniel at the battered table inside the community center. the letter now resting quietly between them. There was a fire burning inside Daniel now. Still small, still flickering, but it was there. Keanu leaned forward. "I have an idea," he said carefully. Daniel looked up, wary but listening. "You're not ready to show up at her door," Keanu said, "and that's okay. But what if you could still reach her? Help her?" Daniel frowned slightly, confused. "How?" Keanu smiled gently. "Lessons," he said. "Written by you. Anonymous. No pressure. No expectation. Just guidance." Daniel sat back, processing. "You mean like notes? Instructions?" Keanu nodded. "Handwritten sheets. Exercises. Techniques you wish someone had taught you. Little by little, page by page, you'd be teaching her. Helping her grow." Daniel swallowed hard. "And she wouldn't know it was me?" "Not yet," Keanu said. "She'll think it's from a foundation supporter. Someone who believes in her." Daniel looked down at his hands. The thought of touching Elena's life without tainting it with his past both terrified and moved him beyond words. "I wouldn't even know where to start," he said quietly. Keanu smiled. "Start where you would have started if you were sitting beside her." Daniel closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, there was something new there. Not hope exactly. Something quieter. Determination. He nodded once. "I'll do it," he said. Keanu felt a deep relief settle in his chest. It was a beginning. Later that afternoon, they sat together in the music room. Daniel, pen in hand, started writing. Simple exercises at first. How to hear the breath between phrases. How to let your hands fall naturally over the keys. How to close your eyes and feel where the next note wants to go, not just where it should. He didn't write with a teacher's voice. He wrote with a father's heart. The pages filled slowly, each word a thread weaving a connection he thought he had lost forever. By the end of the day, Daniel had filled a small stack of papers. Keanu gathered them carefully. "I'll deliver them," he promised. Daniel touched the top page lightly, a silent blessing. "Tell her it's a gift," he said, "from someone who believes she's meant to fly." Keanu nodded, and he meant it when he said she will. 2 days later, Keanu found himself back at apartment 3B. The stairwell groaned under his boots as he climbed, carrying a neat envelope tucked carefully under his arm. Inside it were Daniel's first handwritten lessons. Nothing fancy. No perfect calligraphy or printed sheets. Just raw, honest advice from a musician who had once lost everything and was now trying to give something back. Rosa opened the door, her expression cautious but less guarded than before. Keanu smiled warmly. "I have something for Elena," he said. Rosa raised an eyebrow. "More notebooks?" Keanu chuckled. "Not exactly." He handed her the envelope. A supporter from the foundation heard about Elena. They wanted to send her something special. Lessons, just to encourage her. Rosa hesitated, the skepticism clear in her eyes. But when she glanced over at Elena, who was sitting on the couch with her battered piano book again, something in her softened. She took the envelope without a word. "Thank you," she said finally, stepping aside so Keanu could come in. Elena looked up, her face curious. Rosa handed her the envelope. Elena opened it carefully, almost reverently. Inside, the pages were simple. Blind notebook sheets, words written in a firm but kind hand. The first page read, Lesson 1. Music isn't about playing perfectly. It's about telling the truth. Close your eyes. Play one note. Then another. Let your heart choose the next one. Elena's fingers traced the writing. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not a shy smile this time, a real one, like a light flickering on inside her chest. "Who sent this?" she asked, wonder in her voice. Keanu shrugged with a soft smile. "Someone who believes you have something worth hearing." Elena looked down at the next page. Exercise. Play a scale, but between each note, listen. Feel what your hands want to say. Music is a conversation, not a performance. She sat up straighter, energized. Can I try now? Rosa chuckled under her breath, and even Keanu laughed. You can try whenever you want, he said. Elena raced to the old piano in the corner, the battered keys waiting patiently. She placed her fingers carefully on the keys, the first few notes tentative. Then, following the instructions, she paused. He listened. Well, the sound was different than before. Still raw, still young, but brimming with something deeper. Intention, connection. Rosa wiped her hands on her apron, pretending not to be emotional. Keanu stood quietly near the door, watching the scene unfold. He knew Daniel would never see this moment. Not yet. But if he could, it would break him in the best possible way. Because Elena was already answering his lessons with her heart. She just didn't know who was asking the questions yet. And somehow, that made it even more beautiful. Over the next few weeks, the ritual became a quiet rhythm in their lives. Every Tuesday, Keanu would return to the community center to meet Daniel. Each time, Daniel would hand him a new batch of handwritten lessons, growing more confident, more personal. He wrote about dynamics, about phrasing, about how silence between notes mattered as much as the notes themselves. But he also wrote about trust, about courage, about believing that what you had to say was worth being heard, even when your hands trembled. Keanu would take the pages and deliver them to apartment 3B, always tucked inside a plain envelope, always simply explained as another gift from a supporter. Each time, Elena's excitement grew. She devoured the lessons like sunlight after a long winter. Her playing changed, deepened. She started improvising small melodies, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence. Sometimes Rosa would sit quietly at the table, pretending to read a magazine, tears slipping down her face as her granddaughter filled the little apartment with music that seemed bigger than the walls could hold. Keanu would stay for a while, always lingering in the background, offering quiet encouragement when needed, but mostly just bearing witness to something extraordinary. One afternoon, after a particularly beautiful practice session, Elena turned to him, her eyes shining. I don't know who's sending these lessons, she said, but it feels like they know me. Keanu smiled softly. Maybe they do, he said. Elena laughed, wiping her hands on her jeans. Sometimes, when I'm playing, I feel like I'm not alone. Rosa looked up from her chair. You're not, sweetheart, she said. He never was. Keanu carried those words with him when he left. They sat, heavy and hopeful in his chest, as he made his way back to the community center to meet Daniel. When he arrived, Daniel was already waiting, another envelope in hand. Those angles were tremendous looking. He's doing better than I ever dreamed, Daniel said, handing it over. Keanu smiled. You're teaching her more than music? Daniel looked down, embarrassed but proud. I just want her to feel strong, he said, even if she never knows. Why? Keanu tucked the envelope safely into his jacket. Shame does, he promised. As Daniel returned to the piano and Keanu prepared to leave, a thought struck him. Sometimes the loudest acts of love weren't shouted. They were whispered through small, faithful acts, like a handwritten lesson left on a doorstep, a note between the notes, a quiet reaching across years of silence. And every time Elena placed her fingers on those old, worn keys, she wasn't just learning music. She was hearing the sound of a father's love that had never truly left her. It had just been waiting, patiently, stubbornly, for the right moment to be heard. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon without warning or fanfare. Keanu had stopped by apartment 3B as usual, carrying a new envelope of lessons tucked inside his jacket. But when Rosa opened the door, she put a finger to her lips and pointed toward the living room. Keanu stepped inside quietly. Elena sat at the battered upright piano, her back straight, her eyes closed. But she wasn't playing one of the assigned exercises. She wasn't following any sheet music at all. She was composing. Her hands moved with a confidence that startled even Keanu, stitching together fragments of the lessons Daniel had sent her, praising, breathing, silence, melody, but adding something entirely her own. A lightness, tenderness, downcast from his seat, a voice that was purely, unmistakably Elena. Keanu pulled out his phone slowly, careful not to make a sound, and pressed record. Not for the world, not for anyone else, for Daniel, for the man who had written lessons in the dark, praying they would somehow find her hands. Keanu stood quietly by the doorway, watching her pour her soul into every note. The melody was simple but haunting. There were echoes of Daniel's teaching in the way she allowed pauses to linger, breaths to shape the flow. But there were also sparks of something new, a future blooming inside the old. When Elena finished, she sat there for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the keys, her chest rising and falling with the emotion she had poured out. She opened her eyes slowly and caught Keanu watching her. Instead of embarrassment, she smiled. "Was it okay?" she asked shyly. Keanu's voice caught in his throat, but he managed to speak. "It was more than okay," he said. "It was yours." Elena beamed, her entire face lighting up. I think I want to write more," she said, almost to herself. "Not just play other people's music. I want to tell my own story." Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. "You should," he said. "The world needs your music." Later that evening, Keanu sat with Daniel again at the community center. Without saying anything, he pulled out his phone and pressed play. As Elena's song filled the small room, Daniel froze. He recognized the phrasing, the patterns, the small, almost hidden lessons he had written on crumpled notebook paper late at night, wondering if they would ever matter to anyone. Tears spilled down Daniel's face. It's not from sadness, from awe, from the realization that love, even broken and buried, had a way of blooming again. Daniel covered his mouth with his hand as Elena's final note faded into the quiet. Keanu sat beside him, silent, letting the music say everything words never could. When the recording ended, Daniel wiped his face and laughed, a soft, trembling laugh full of wonder and heartbreak and hope, all tangled together. "She heard me," he whispered. Keanu nodded. "She did." Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, as if the recording had pulled the strength right out of him. He shook his head slowly, still wiping at his damp cheeks. "I used to think," he said, voice raw, "that everything I touched turned bad." Keanu stayed quiet, letting him find the words at his own pace. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "But hearing her," he continued, "hearing the way she made something beautiful out of pieces I barely dared to hope she'd receive, it makes me believe maybe not everything I left behind was broken." Keanu's heart ached at the weight of those words. "You didn't just leave behind mistakes," Keanu said gently. "You left behind a legacy, a gift." Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. "If you had told me 10 years ago that a few sheets of paper and a handful of old exercises could become that," he said, gesturing toward the silent phone, "I would have thought you were crazy." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's the smallest notes," he said, "that carry the biggest meanings." Daniel sat back, letting that truth settle deep into his bones. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Keanu leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "There's something else," he said, "something I think Elena's ready for." Daniel looked up, wary but hopeful. Keanu chose his words carefully. "There's a charity recital coming up at the community hall," he said. "A fundraiser for music education programs. They're looking for young performers." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "You think she'd want to?" Keanu smiled. "I think she needs to." Daniel swallowed hard, his emotions rising again. He pictured Elena sitting at that battered piano, pouring her heart into music she didn't even know had started with him. He pictured her walking onto a stage, sharing that music with the world. Not to impress, not to perform, but to speak, to tell her story. Even if she didn't know yet how deeply her father's heartbeat lived inside her song. "I don't want to push her," Daniel said after a long pause. "You won't," Keanu promised. "Just plant the idea, let her choose." Daniel nodded slowly. The thought scared him. The thought thrilled him. It was terrifying, after so many years of silence, to imagine her stepping into the light. But it was beautiful, too, because she wouldn't just be stepping onto a stage. She would be stepping into herself, her true self. The girl who had inherited more than blood. The girl who had inherited courage. Keanu stood, pocketing his phone. "I'll talk to her," he said, gently. Daniel smiled through his tears. "Tell her," he said, voice trembling, "that whoever taught her would be proud." Keanu's voice was soft as he replied, "I think she already knows." Outside, the last rays of the sun spilled gold across the pavement. Inside, two men sat in the fading light, quietly building a bridge between what was lost and what could still be found. The next afternoon, Keanu returned to apartment 3B, carrying not an envelope this time, but a different kind of invitation. Elena was sitting at the piano again when he arrived, her fingers drifting across the keys in slow, thoughtful patterns. Rosa greeted him with a smile and a knowing glance, then quietly disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them alone. Keanu waited until Elena finished her piece before speaking. "You know," he said casually, leaning against the doorway, "there's a recital coming up downtown." Elena turned around, curiosity lighting her face. "A recital?" Keanu nodded. "A fundraiser for music education. They're looking for young performers. It's not fancy or anything, just a chance to share what you've been working on." Elena bit her lip, thinking. "I've never played in front of people before," she admitted. Keanu smiled gently. "You already do," he said. "Every time you sit here and pour your heart into those keys." She laughed nervously, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "But this would be different." Keanu walked closer, his voice soft but steady. "Sometimes, when we share our music," he said, "we're not just telling our own story. We're giving someone else permission to tell theirs." Elena looked down at her hands. "What if I mess up?" Keanu smiled wider. "Then you'll mess up beautifully," he said, "and you'll show everyone what real courage looks like." Jan Amerkov, humble. Elena thought about it for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. "I'll think about it," she said. Keanu left it at that, not pushing, not pressing. He knew she needed to feel ready on her own terms. Later that evening, back at the community center, Keanu shared the news with Daniel. He watched as Daniel's shoulders sagged with a mixture of relief and hope. "I'm considering it," Keanu said. "That's more than enough for now." Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't care if she plays a single note wrong," he said. "I just want her to know she belongs there." Keanu smiled. Shimo. The days that followed were a flurry of preparation. Elena practiced every afternoon, sometimes with Rosa listening from the kitchen, sometimes with Keanu sitting quietly nearby, offering a thumbs up or a quiet word of encouragement. Each day her confidence grew. And each day, somewhere across town, Daniel sat at his own battered piano, playing along silently, feeling her music in the spaces between his notes. They were writing their first song together. Not on sheet music, not with rehearsed performances, but in the invisible thread stretching between them. A melody, built from longing, forgiveness, and something even stronger. Love, unspoken, unbreakable. And finally, on a crisp, golden evening, the night of the recital arrived. A night that would change everything. Not because Elena would play perfectly, but because, for the first time, she would be heard. And somewhere in the crowd, a father who thought he had lost his song would realize it had been playing all along. The night before Elena's recital, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, the letter Daniel had once written still fresh in his mind. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The broken paths, the unseen lessons, the silent prayers whispered into a world that sometimes didn't seem to answer. And yet here they were, on the brink of something beautiful. Keanu logged into the Foundation's online forum, the place where thousands had shared their stories before, where strangers had found kinship through hope, loss, and quiet miracles. He took a breath and began to type. Tomorrow night, a young musician will play her first original song. She doesn't know that her music is part of a much bigger story. A story about a bond that distance and silence could never erase. She thinks she's standing alone, but what she carries inside her was never really lost. He paused, thinking carefully. Then he added the prompt. Have you ever felt connected to someone you never met? Maybe a family member, a friend you lost before you could find them, a piece of yourself you didn't realize was waiting. If so, share your story. You never know who needs to hear it. Keanu hit publish and leaned back in his chair. Within minutes, replies began pouring in. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. A woman wrote about finding her birth mother after 30 years, recognizing her instantly from a childhood photo she had carried like a prayer. A man posted about inheriting an old violin he never knew his grandfather had played, only to realize he could play too, without ever being taught. Another woman shared about a brother she had never met, separated through adoption, who lived only 10 miles away, and whose laugh sounded exactly like hers. Story after story, the thread grew longer. Each reply a testament to the invisible threads that wove through every life. Threads of music, of blood, of memory, of love. People who had never spoken to each other before began replying to strangers' comments, finding small mirrors of their own stories in someone else's words. Keanu scrolled through them slowly, his heart full. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. It wasn't even just about Daniel. It was about everyone who had ever believed, even quietly, even brokenly, that love could find a way back. Even when it seemed impossible. Even when years had passed. Even when silence seemed louder than hope. Keanu typed one more line beneath the prompt. Sometimes the most powerful songs are the ones we didn't know we were writing. He closed the laptop carefully, the glow of the screen fading into the soft light of the room. Tomorrow would be a big day, not just for Elena, not just for Daniel, but for everyone who had ever carried a melody inside them, waiting for someone to hear it. The next morning, Keanu checked the forum again before heading out. Overnight, the post had exploded with even more responses. There were messages from across the country, from people of every age, background, and story. One comment came from a soldier stationed overseas who had never met his niece but carried her drawing in his pocket like a lucky charm. Another from a woman whose father had passed away before she was born, but who found his handwriting one day tucked inside a used bookstore novel. There were poems, songs, photographs of people holding heirlooms they had inherited from loved ones they had never met, but somehow still knew. And one comment in particular caught Keanu's attention. I used to dream of someone who played the same melody I couldn't name. Years later, I found out I had a sister adopted at birth, and she played the same song without ever learning it. Some bonds can't be broken. They just wait for us to find them. Keanu read that comment 3 times, the words settling deep into his chest. That was proof. Proof that connection wasn't always about bloodlines or last names. It was about the quiet, invisible ways we carried each other through the darkness. It was about music left in the walls, about letters never sent but somehow received, about melodies that survived even when everything else fell apart. Keanu sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the soft morning light spreading across the city. Today, Elena would step onto that small stage, clutching her battered notebook of music. Today, Daniel would sit hidden in the back row, heart pounding, carrying years of silence and a fragile hope he never thought he'd feel again. And today, Keanu realized, wasn't just about reconnecting one family. It was about reminding everyone who had ever loved, lost, or waited that they weren't alone. Their music still played. Their stories still mattered. Their invisible threads were still weaving something beautiful. He opened the forum one last time before leaving and added a final message under the thread. If you're reading this, and you've ever loved someone from a distance, through music, through memory, through hope, you're not alone. Today, someone's song is being heard because someone else refused to stop listening. Keep believing. Keep playing. Keep waiting. Love always finds a way. He closed the laptop, grabbed his jacket, and stepped out into the day, the crisp air filling his lungs. He didn't know exactly what would happen at the recital, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter how small the room, no matter how nervous the hands on the keys, today a song would find its way home. And it would be enough. It would be more than enough, because it always had been. The afternoon sun dipped low behind the old brick building that housed the community hall, casting long golden shadows across the sidewalk. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet excitement. Parents, grandparents, and neighbors filled the folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A battered piano stood at the front, draped in soft lighting that made it look almost elegant despite its scuffed edges and missing veneer. Keanu stood near the side wall, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, scanning the crowd. Near the back, almost blending into the shadows, Daniel sat hunched forward, a baseball cap pulled low over his face, his fingers nervously laced together. His whole body was tense, vibrating with hope and terror at the same time. Keanu caught his eye and gave him a small, steady nod. Daniel breathed out slowly, trying to calm the storm inside him. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about her. The lights dimmed slightly, and a woman from the community center took the small microphone at the front. She welcomed everyone, explained the purpose of the recital, to raise funds for music scholarships for underprivileged youth, and introduced the young performers. One by one, students took their turns. Some stumbled shyly through beginner pieces. Some dazzled with practiced scales. The audience clapped warmly for every single one, the encouragement filling the room with a kind of safety net. And then it was Elena's turn. Keanu watched her step onto the small stage, her battered sheet music clutched in trembling hands. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back loosely, and her face a mix of nerves and fierce determination. The room fell quiet as she sat at the piano. Keanu's heart thudded. Daniel looked like he might collapse under the weight of it all. Elena placed her hands gently on the keys. For a moment she froze, eyes shut tight. The silence stretched just a little too long. Keanu held his breath. Then, with a deep inhale, Elena opened her eyes and played the first note. It was soft, barely a whisper, a tentative reaching, like the first step onto a frozen lake. But she didn't falter. She kept going. Note after note, her composition unfolded. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. Raw. Beautiful. Every measure carried the weight of lessons she had received from an unseen hand, the invisible love of a father she didn't yet know she had. The melody swelled, pulling everyone into its orbit. In the back of the room, Daniel pressed his hand against his chest, feeling every note as if it were stitched directly into his ribs. Tears filled his eyes, blurring the stage. He watched as Elena played the bridge, the part she had improvised herself, the part no lesson had taught her. And he wept openly now, no longer caring who might see. Keanu felt his own throat tighten, the room spinning just slightly from the power of it all. When Elena reached the final chord, she let it linger, vibrating into the rafters like a prayer. Then she lifted her hand slowly and looked up. For a second, the room was silent. Then, as if breaking a spell, applause erupted. Thunderous, a standing ovation, in a small room that had just witnessed something far greater than talent. It had witnessed a soul opening itself to the world. Elena stood quickly, blushing under the weight of the applause. She gave a small, almost shy bow, then hurried off the stage, clutching her sheet music to her chest. Keanu waited for her near the side of the hall, smiling warmly as she approached. "You were incredible," he said softly, his voice full of pride. Elena laughed nervously, her hands trembling slightly. "I thought I was going to faint," she admitted. "You didn't," Keanu said. "You played from your heart. That's all anyone ever hopes for." She looked down at her feet, her cheeks burning. "I felt something," she said, "like I wasn't playing alone." Keanu's heart twisted at her words. He glanced toward the back of the room, where Daniel still sat, his face buried in his hands, trying to pull himself back together. Keanu gently placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the people who help shape us aren't always standing right beside us. Sometimes they're closer than we realize." Elena looked up at him, her brow furrowed slightly. "You mean the mystery teacher?" Keanu smiled. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe someone who's been teaching you not just with notes, but with love, with hope." Elena hugged her sheet music tighter. "I wish I knew who it was," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "Maybe you will," he said, "when you're ready." Across the room, Daniel slowly rose from his chair. He watched Elena from a distance, drinking in the sight of her, laughing quietly with Keanu, clutching her music, alive and bright and strong. He didn't dare move closer. Not yet. His hands shook at his sides, the pull to run to her almost unbearable. But he knew this wasn't his moment to claim. It was hers. He would wait, just like she had unknowingly waited for him all these years. Keanu caught Daniel's eye across the room and gave him a small nod of reassurance. Soon, when the time was right. For now, it was enough that Elena had found her voice. It was enough that Daniel had found the proof he hadn't dared hope for. That love, even unspoken, even from a distance, had the power to shape a life. As the night wound down, Keanu stood outside the hall under the wide stretch of stars, feeling the cool night air settle around him. Elena stood beside him, looking up at the sky. "Do you think," she asked quietly, "that music can find people, even when they're far away?" Keanu smiled at the wonder in her voice. "I don't think music just finds people," he said. "I think it ties them together, even when they don't know it yet." Elena nodded slowly, her eyes shining. I think I want to find the person who believed in me." Keanu placed a gentle hand on her back. "And I think," he said, "they're already closer than you imagine." The night wrapped around them like a soft promise, filled with melodies not yet finished and stories not yet fully told. But already, something beautiful had begun. And there was more music still to come. The night after the recital, Keanu sat alone in his living room, the envelope resting heavily on the coffee table in front of him. It wasn't just paper tucked inside. It was years, regrets, hope, and finally, love, written in a language that didn't need spoken words. Daniel had filled the envelope with handwritten sheet music, pieces he had composed in quiet moments, some rough, some polished, all carrying the same silent prayer. Let her know. Let her feel it. Let her find him. At the very top, tucked between the compositions, was a letter. Not a lesson this time. A letter, written in Daniel's unsteady hand, but every word chosen with care. Keanu had read it once, then folded it back inside, his heart too full to read it again. Now it was time to deliver it. The next afternoon, Keanu made his way back to apartment 3B. The stairs creaked under his weight, the familiar smell of old wood and dust wrapping around him like a memory. When he knocked, Rosa answered, her face soft with recognition. "She's practicing," she said quietly, stepping aside. Inside, Elena sat at the piano, her fingers moving lightly over the keys, playing fragments of songs she was still learning to claim as her own. Keanu waited until she looked up. "I have something for you," he said. Elena's face lit up with curiosity. He held out the thick envelope, the weight of it almost tipping his hand forward. "It's from the same person who's been sending you lessons," Keanu explained. "They wanted you to have this now." Elena wiped her hands on her jeans before taking it carefully, as if afraid it might crumble if she held it too tightly. She sat cross-legged on the couch, the envelope resting in her lap. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Keanu sat down across from her, giving her space. Finally, Elena peeled open the flap and slid the contents out. Sheet after sheet of music spilled onto her lap, some neatly written, some marked with hasty notes in the margins. Elena picked up the top piece. Her eyes widened. These weren't just exercises. They were songs, real songs, melodies, full of longing, hope, and something deeper she couldn't quite name yet. She flipped through a few pages, her hands shaking slightly, and then she found it. The letter was short, simple, but it hit harder than anything else. "Dear Elena, you don't know me yet, but I have always loved you through every note you played. Every time you touched the keys, you answered a song I left in the world for you to find. You were never playing alone. You were always playing with me. Keep playing, my bright star. Your music is the voice of everything I couldn't say before. With all the love I have, your silent teacher." Elena read it once, then again, her hands trembling. She looked up at Keanu, tears brimming in her eyes. "Who?" she started, but her voice cracked. Keanu just smiled gently. "Someone who never stopped believing you would find your way." Elena pressed the letter to her chest, the pages of music slipping from her lap and scattering like soft leaves across the couch. She didn't move to gather them right away. She just sat there, eyes closed, breathing in the weight of the moment. Keanu stayed silent, letting her have that space, letting her absorb the truth, even if she didn't yet know all of it. Finally, Elena opened her eyes, wiping at them quickly. "Who would do something like this?" she whispered. "Spend all this time for me?" Keanu smiled gently. "Sometimes," he said, "the people who love us most aren't always standing right in front of us. Sometimes they're standing behind the music, behind every note you thought you played alone." Elena looked down at the letter again, her fingers tracing the words as if memorizing them by touch. I thought I was just playing for myself," she said softly, "but it feels like someone's been listening all along." "You were never alone," Keanu said, his voice low. "You never will be." Elena leaned forward, gathering the scattered music sheets carefully, as if each one was a piece of something precious she hadn't realized she had been building. She tucked them back into the envelope, holding it protectively against her chest. Can I write back?" she asked. Keanu smiled wider. "I think that would mean more than you know," he said. For a long moment, Elena sat there, deep in thought. Then she stood up, determination setting into her shoulders. She crossed the room to the small desk by the window, where an old spiral notebook sat forgotten. She tore out a fresh page, grabbed a pencil, and began to write. Keanu didn't read over her shoulder. He didn't need to. He could feel the truth of it filling the room like sunlight. After a few minutes, Elena folded the page carefully and slipped it into a plain envelope. She handed it to Keanu, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze steady. "Can you give it to them?" she asked. "I will," Keanu promised. He tucked the envelope safely into his jacket. Before he left, Elena touched his arm lightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking a little. "For believing in me, even when I didn't know someone was." Keanu placed his hand gently over hers. "You have more people believing in you than you realize," he said. He left her standing there in the fading light, the envelope of songs cradled against her chest, her whole world quietly shifting into something new. And as he walked down the old staircase, Keanu knew that music had done what words never could, and built a bridge. A bridge between silence and sound, between past mistakes and future hope, between a father and a daughter who had never really been lost to each other, just waiting, just playing two sides of the same unfinished song. Keanu didn't go straight to the community center. Instead, he walked through the quiet streets for a while, the envelope from Elena tucked carefully inside his jacket, close to his heart. The sky was beginning to shift, soft purples and blues bleeding into the edges of the city skyline. He thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The broken promises, the letters unsent, the songs written in secret. And somehow, despite it all, here they were, still reaching for each other across the distance, to finding ways to say the things that words had failed to say. When he finally arrived at the center, Daniel was already there, sitting on the old wooden bench by the door, a worn guitar case resting at his feet. He looked up as Keanu approached, his expression wary but hopeful. "You came," Daniel said, his voice rough from emotion. Keanu nodded. "And so did she," he said, pulling the envelope carefully from his jacket. Daniel stood slowly, his eyes locking onto the envelope like it held the world. Keanu handed it over without a word. Daniel's hands shook as he took it, holding it for a moment before he dared to open it. When he finally unfolded the letter, he read it once, twice, his breath catching on every line. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall freely, each one a small forgiveness he had never allowed himself before. "Sheem wrote back," he whispered, almost disbelieving. Keanu stood beside him, silent, letting him have this moment. Daniel clutched the letter to his chest and looked up at the sky. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for giving me this." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't give you anything," he said softly. "She did." Daniel laughed through his tears, a broken, beautiful sound. "I never thought I'd get to be part of her life," he said, "not even from a distance." "You already are," Keanu said. "You always were." They sat there together for a long while, the city moving around them unnoticed. Eventually, Daniel tucked the letter carefully into his guitar case, almost like a treasure too precious to hold for long. He turned to Keanu, his voice steadier now. "Do you think," he said, "one day I could meet her?" Keanu smiled gently. "I think one day," he said, "she'll find you." Daniel nodded, hope blooming in his chest like a song just beginning to form. They didn't need to rush it. They didn't need to force it. The music between them was already playing, a little stronger each day, a little louder. And somewhere in a small apartment, a young girl was playing a song she didn't know had started long before she ever touched a piano. A song that had been waiting for her, just like the man who wrote it. Waiting, and believing that somehow, someday, she would find her way home. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the envelope of songs resting in front of her like a fragile treasure. The late afternoon light filtered through the thin curtains, painting everything in soft gold. Rosa bustled around the kitchen, pretending to tidy up, but Elena could see the way her hands trembled. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing minute. Finally, Elena cleared her throat. "Grandma?" she said softly. Rosa froze, a dish towel clenched in her hands. Elena hesitated, her heart pounding. But the question had already formed, and it demanded to be spoken. "Hey, didn't you ever tell me about him?" Rosa turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "I wanted to protect you," she said in a whisper. "I thought, if you didn't know, you wouldn't miss him." Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "But I missed him anyway," she said, her voice cracking. Rosa crossed the room slowly, sinking into the chair across from her. "I thought he was lost," she said, her voice trembling. "After the trouble he got into, after prison, I thought he was broken. I thought he'd only hurt you if you let him into your heart." Elena swallowed hard, tears blurring her vision. "You never gave me the choice," she whispered. Rosa flinched, as if the words physically struck her. "I know," she said, "and I was wrong." The room filled with the sound of both their breathing, heavy and uneven. Elena pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead, fighting back the swirl of emotions rising inside her. Anger, sadness, confusion, longing. "I spent my whole life thinking my father didn't want me," she said. "And all this time, he was writing music for me." Rosa reached across the table, but Elena pulled her hand back instinctively. It wasn't that she didn't love Rosa. It wasn't that she didn't understand that Rosa had tried, in her own way, to do what she thought was best. It was that something inside her had shifted, and she needed time to find her footing again. "I'm sorry," Rosa whispered, her voice breaking. "I was so afraid he would disappoint you. I never thought he would love you so much." Elena looked down at the envelope of songs, her heart aching with the weight of it all. "I need time," she said quietly. "I need to figure out what's real for myself." Rosa nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll wait," she said, "as long as you need." Elena stood slowly, gathering the envelope in her arms. She didn't run from the pain. She carried it with her as she crossed the living room and sat down at the old upright piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. Then, gently, she pulled out the latest sheet music from the envelope, the newest composition Daniel had written, and she began to play. The first notes spilled into the room, soft and uncertain at first, like footsteps on unfamiliar ground. Elena closed her eyes, letting the music lead her. The melody was different from the others. It was slower, more fragile, built with pauses that lingered just a moment longer than they should have. It felt like someone trying to speak, stumbling through the weight of everything left unsaid. She played carefully, letting her fingers follow the map her father had drawn for her without words. Each chord change felt like a question. Each soft resolution felt like a trembling answer. By the middle of the piece, Elena's shoulders relaxed. The anger and sadness inside her didn't disappear, but they softened. The music wrapped around them like a balm, a reminder that even broken things could be beautiful. Across the room, Rosa sat silently in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes closed as she listened. When Elena reached the final few measures, she hesitated, feeling the swell of emotion rise in her chest. The last notes were simple, 3 quiet chords, fading into silence. They felt like an offering, a surrender. Elena let her hands fall gently from the keys and sat there, blinking back tears. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The piano's soft echoes lingered in the corners of the room, a reminder of everything that had been lost, and everything that could still be found. Finally, Elena turned to Rosa, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," she said, "I can forgive him." Rosa's eyes snapped open, glistening with tears. "If he never stopped loving me," Elena finished, her voice trembling. Rosa covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. Elena looked down at the worn piano keys beneath her fingers. "I'm not ready to forget," she said honestly. "I'm not ready to pretend everything's okay." "You don't have to," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion. Elena nodded slowly. "But I want to understand," she said. "I want to know him, not the mistakes, not just the past. I want to know the person who wrote these songs." Rosa reached for her, hesitant, and this time, Elena let her take her hand. They sat there in silence, their hands joined across the battered wood of the piano bench. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't even a clean beginning, but it was a step, a small, brave step forward. And sometimes, Elena thought, that was enough. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't happened. Maybe it was about choosing to keep playing anyway, choosing to let the music carry the broken parts, not erase them, choosing to believe that love could still be found between the cracks. She picked up the next sheet of music and placed it on the stand. and she began to play again. The new piece began more confidently, her fingers moving with a steadier rhythm, as if something inside her had shifted during those few quiet minutes. The music was different now, still tense, still aching, but also filled with a new kind of strength, a promise to herself that she could hold both the sorrow and the hope without having to choose between them. Rosa sat back, watching Elena in quiet awe. There was something in her granddaughter's posture now. Something steady, almost luminous. Not the blind innocence of a child, not the heavy anger of betrayal. Something else, a kind of grace. Elena finished the second piece and let her hands fall into her lap. She sat there for a moment, staring at the keys. Then she turned to Rosa, her voice steady for the first time all afternoon. "Did he ever ask about me?" she asked softly. Rosa's eyes filled again, but she nodded. "Every letter he sent," she said, "every phone call, when they let him, he always asked." Elena bit her lip, feeling her chest ache. "And you never told him anything?" I thought it would hurt you more to keep reminding him," Rosa said, ashamed. "I thought, if I cut the tie, it would be kinder?" Elena looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. "I think," she said slowly, "that love doesn't disappear just because we're afraid of it." Rosa said nothing. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to excuse. Only the raw, painful truth between them. Elena stood, gathering the music sheets carefully and placing them back into their envelope. Then she turned to face her grandmother fully. "I don't hate you," she said gently. "I know you tried to protect me." Fresh tears slipped down Rosa's cheeks. "But I need to know him now," Elena said, "for myself." Rosa nodded, her voice lost to emotion. "I'll help however I can," she whispered. Elena smiled faintly, a small, sad smile that held more understanding than blame. I think I want to meet him one day," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But on my terms." "Of course," Rosa said quickly. Elena hugged the envelope of songs to her chest again. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she admitted. "But if he's still out there, still playing, maybe the music will help me find the words." Rosa reached out and touched her arm lightly. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe the music was always the words you both needed." Elena blinked hard, then smiled through her tears. She picked up the newest piece, still slightly crumpled from her hands, and placed it back on the piano stand. Then she sat down once more. This time, when she began to play, the notes didn't sound hesitant. They sounded like a door opening, like a story beginning again. And somewhere far away, Elena imagined, someone else was listening, waiting, and still loving her through every note. The air inside the community center was cool and still, the late afternoon sun casting long golden beams across the scuffed floors. Keanu stood just inside the doorway, heart pounding a little harder than usual. Today was not about him. It was about two people who had been separated by silence for too long. It was about a conversation that could only happen through music. Daniel was already seated at the old upright piano near the front of the empty room. His head was bowed low, his hands resting lightly on the keys, barely pressing down. He looked smaller somehow, not because of his age or the years he had lost, but because of the weight he carried, the weight of longing, of regret, of hope he barely dared to feel. Keanu gave him a nod from across the room. Daniel nodded back, taking a shaky breath. Then, without a word, he began to play. It was a piece Keanu hadn't heard before. Soft, slow, hesitant at first. The melody was simple, tentru, like a hand reaching out in the dark. Keanu stepped back into the hallway, giving them privacy. He heard Elena's footsteps before he saw her. She appeared in the doorway, holding her sheet music close to her chest, her eyes wide and uncertain. Keanu smiled reassuringly and motioned for her to go inside. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she stepped over the threshold. As she moved closer, she saw him. Daniel. His back was to her, but something about the way he played, pulled at something deep inside her chest, something that had been waiting. Elena stood frozen a few feet away, watching, listening. Daniel didn't see her yet. He just kept playing, the music flowing from him in waves, filling the room with a fragile kind of hope. Slowly, almost without thinking, Elena crossed the room. She placed her sheet music gently on the edge of the piano, and then she sat down beside him. Daniel glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, his hands faltering slightly on the keys. But he didn't stop. He just kept playing. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, then placed her fingers on the keys next to his. At first, she just listened, waited for the right moment. And then, without looking at each other, without saying a word, she began to play along. She found a second melody within his, a harmony that had always been waiting, tucked quietly inside the spaces he had left open for her. Their notes twined together, clumsy at first, then stronger, braver. Keanu watched from the hallway, his throat tightening. There were no words in that room, no apology spoken, no explanations given, but the music said everything, everything they had carried, everything they had lost, and everything they were choosing to begin again. At first, their melodies moved like strangers meeting for the first time. Cautious, testy. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she followed Daniel's lead, unsure if she was intruding, unsure if she even belonged there. But Daniel shifted his playing, opening the chords wider, leaving her space to breathe, to find her own voice within his. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was real. A conversation unfolding between two people who had waited their whole lives to hear each other. The music rose and fell like a tide, pulling them closer without ever needing to say a single word. Daniel shifted into a softer melody, one he had written years ago but never dared to play aloud. It was a lullaby. Simple. Haunting. Elena hesitated for only a breath before matching his notes, filling in the empty spaces with her own heart. Their fingers danced across the battered keys, sometimes clashing, sometimes falling perfectly into step, the way conversations between family often did. Stumbling, recovering, trying again. Daniel dared to glance at her now, his hands never stopping. She was focused entirely on the keys, a small furrow between her brows, her whole being poured into the music. His chest ached with love so fierce it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. He had missed everything. Her first words, her first steps, her first songs. But he was here now, and she was here too, choosing to sit beside him, choosing to play. Keanu leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed loosely, his heart swelling in his chest. He had seen many reunions in his time with the Foundation, some filled with tears, some with shouting, some with awkward silences and slow repairs. But never this. Never something so pure, so wordless, so complete. Daniel and Elena kept playing, weaving a melody that wasn't written on any page, that had no beginning and no end. It simply was, born from years of waiting, from letters never sent, from music carried silently across the miles between them. The song built slowly, like dawn bleeding into the sky, soft, sure, unstoppable. And in that music, Elena found the answer to questions she hadn't known how to ask. She didn't need an apology. She didn't need explanations. She only needed what was happening right now. The sound of two broken lives learning how to fit together, one note at a time. When they finally slowed, letting the last few notes hang trembling in the air, Elena didn't pull away. She sat there, breathing hard, blinking back the tears she hadn't realized were falling. Daniel rested his hands lightly on the keys, not daring to move. Slowly, Elena turned to him. For the first time, their eyes met. No words passed between them, when seeing a small, trembling smile. And in that smile, Daniel saw everything he had been waiting for. Forgiveness, hope, a chance to try, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a song they would write together. The silence between them now wasn't heavy. It wasn't filled with regret or fear. It was filled with something softer, something lighter. Daniel let his hands slip from the keys first, resting them on his knees, grounding himself to the moment he had almost believed would never come. Elena mirrored him, her fingers curling slightly into her lap. For a long moment they just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, breathing in the same rhythm, tethered by something deeper than blood. Keanu stepped quietly into the room, sensing that it was time to close this chapter gently. He moved slowly, careful not to startle the fragile peace that had settled. Daniel glanced up at him, his eyes shining but steady. Keanu gave him a small nod, a quiet encouragement. Elena stood first, picking up her sheet music and slipping it back into her folder. She looked down at Daniel, her voice a little shaky when she finally spoke. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel's throat worked hard to find words. He stood too, his hands clenching and unclenching nervously. He wanted to say so much. "I'm sorry. I missed you. I'm proud of you." But all that came out was a soft, broken, "Thank you for playing with me." And somehow, it was enough. Elena smiled, a real smile this time, small but true. She shifted the folder under her arm, her body leaning slightly toward him in a way that spoke of trust not yet fully given, but cautiously offered. Keanu saw it. Daniel saw it too. A door opening, just a crack. A beginning. "Will you come back next week?" Elena asked suddenly, surprising even herself. Daniel blinked, stunned. "Only if you want me to," he said quickly, terrified of pushing too hard, too fast. Elena shrugged one shoulder, pretending to be casual. "I might need someone to help me with the hard parts," she said, her voice teasing but soft. Daniel smiled then, a shaky, breathless thing that looked like hope being born for the first time. "I'd like that," he said. They gathered their things slowly, neither wanting to be the first to walk away. When they finally moved toward the door, Keanu fell into step beside them, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. As they stepped into the cool evening air, the world outside seemed softer somehow, the colors richer. Music floated behind them from an open window. Someone else practicing scales, someone else beginning a journey. Keanu hesitated on the steps. Elena noticed and turned back. She didn't say anything. She just offered him a small nod, a promise that next time he could walk beside her. He smiled again, stronger this time, and followed. Keanu watched them go, the evening breeze tugging gently at their clothes, carrying their laughter, their cautious words, their quiet hope out into the night. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just the soft, steady rhythm of two hearts finding their way back to each other, one note at a time. The small apartment in 3B felt different now. The old walls still carried the smell of musty books and worn wood, the floor still creaked in the same familiar places, and the battered upright piano still sat against the far wall, its ivory keys yellowed with time. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the music filling the rooms more often. It was the feeling, a quiet sense of fullness, of healing in motion. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor, the sunlight pooling around her as she carefully worked with a simple wooden frame. Spread out in front of her were two photographs. One was old, yellowed at the edges. A teenage boy stood proudly in a too-big suit, a heavy trophy clutched in his arms. The photograph had always been tucked away, hidden behind other pictures. Rosa had kept it but had never spoken of it. The second photograph was newer, printed only a few days ago. It showed Elena and Daniel sitting side by side at the community center piano, their heads bent together, fingers moving across the keys. They weren't looking at the camera. They hadn't even known Keanu had snapped the photo from the doorway. It was candid, very unposed, perfect. Elena lined the two photographs up carefully in the frame, side by side. Two moments in time, decades apart, now reunited in one small window of memory. The first photo told a story of what could have been. The second told a story of what still could be. She pressed the backing onto the frame and clicked it closed, brushing her fingers over the glass. Her throat tightened as she studied it. So much lost, so much found. She rose to her feet and crossed the room to the piano. Above it, the wall was bare except for a few old nail holes. It was the perfect spot. She lifted the frame and hung it carefully, stepping back to make sure it was straight. The sunlight caught the glass, making both images glow softly. Rosa came into the room then, a laundry basket on her hip. She stopped when she saw what Elena had done. For a long time, she said nothing. She just stared, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she set the basket down and moved closer. Her hand brushed the frame lightly, almost reverently. "I should have told you sooner," she said, her voice rough with emotion. Elena didn't look away from the photographs. "You're telling me now," she said softly. Rosa's hand found Elena's and squeezed gently. Visitors would come into the apartment in the weeks and months ahead. Friends, neighbors, strangers from the music program who came for lessons. Every single one of them paused when they saw the frame above the piano. None of them needed a caption. The story was there, in every detail. The past, the present, the music that had carried them across books. Some visitors would linger by the piano, studying the images with quiet wonder. They would ask questions. They would smile sadly or wipe at their eyes without meaning to. Most would say the same thing before they left. "You can feel it," they would whisper. "The love in that picture." Elena never explained much. She didn't need to. The music did the talking. Every afternoon, she sat at the upright piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, weaving the old with the new. Sometimes Daniel joined her, sitting silently on the bench, letting his hands find their place beside hers. Sometimes Rosa watched from the kitchen, humming softly along. The apartment that had once carried so much silence now vibrated with warmth, with life, with songs written and songs still being born. One evening, after a long practice session, Daniel stayed behind when Rosa left the room to start dinner. He stood in front of the framed photographs for a long time, hands stuffed awkwardly into the pockets of his worn jeans. Elena finished stacking her sheet music and joined him. For a while, they stood side by side, staring at the photos without speaking. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and rough. "I didn't think, after everything, that I'd ever be part of a story like this again." Elena glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "You never stopped being part of it," she said, softly. Deshman swallowed hard, blinking quickly. He touched the frame lightly, his fingers trembling against the glass over his younger self's smiling face. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Elena shook her head gently. "It's not about deserving," she said. "It's about showing up." Daniel smiled through the wetness in his eyes. "I'll keep showing up," he promised. Elena nodded. "I know." She sat back down at the piano and patted the bench beside her. Daniel hesitated only a moment before joining her. Their hands found the keys without needing a song sheet this time. They just played. A few wrong notes, a few missed rhythms, but also laughter and grace, and something stronger than either of them had words for. Above them, the framed photographs caught the light, glinting like small beacons against the faded wall. The story wasn't finished. The music wasn't perfect, but the picture was. Two lives, stitched back together by love, by hope, and by the invisible thread of music that had never really broken. And somewhere deep inside her chest, Elena felt it. A quiet certainty. No matter how far apart they had once been, they had found their way back. Note by note, memory by memory, song by song, together. The weeks after the recital settled into a new rhythm, quieter, but fuller somehow. Elena's small apartment buzzed with the sound of music almost every day now, but it wasn't only her practicing anymore. Daniel became a regular presence. Not every moment, not in every room, but always close enough to offer a steady hand when needed. He started by sitting quietly in the corner during Elena's lessons with her students, careful not to overstep. At first, The children were wary of him, a soft-spoken man with kind but worn eyes, often carrying a battered guitar instead of a clipboard like the other volunteers. But slowly, as Daniel's patience showed itself, they warmed to him. He never corrected. He never criticized. He only encouraged. A quiet word when a student got frustrated. A small nod when someone stumbled and tried again. He became part of the fabric of the place, without ever demanding space. Elena watched him carefully at first, uncertain how to balance this new presence in her life. She was still learning to trust the fragile bridge they had built, still learning that forgiveness wasn't a doorway you walked through once. It was a path you traveled, day after day, and sometimes it was a song you had to play over and over until the melody sank into your bones. But Daniel made it easier by asking nothing of her. He didn't press for long talks. He didn't dig for reassurances. He simply showed up, steady, humble, present. And slowly, without realizing when it started, Elena began to lean into that steady presence. One afternoon, after a long group lesson, she found herself waving Daniel over to the piano bench without thinking about it. "Show them how you would phrase this," she said, tapping a difficult section on the sheet music. Daniel blinked in surprise, then nodded. He sat beside her, demonstrating the run, slowing it down, breaking it into manageable pieces for the younger students to grasp. The children watched him with wide eyes, their small hands mimicking his motions in the air. Afterward, one of the youngest students, a shy boy who rarely spoke, turned to Daniel and asked if he would come back next week. Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded. "If you'll have me," he said, his voice rough but smiling. From then on, it became natural. Elena still led the lessons, her confidence growing with each passing day. But Daniel was there too, a quiet support woven into the background. Sometimes they played small duets together, demonstrating pieces for the students. Sometimes they simply sat side by side, letting the music speak for them. And slowly Daniel began to change too. The shame he had carried for so long, the weight of all the years he had lost, began to ease. Not erased, but softened. Because Elena wasn't just learning from him anymore. He was learning from her, learning that he was allowed to start again, learning that broken things could still create beauty, learning that love didn't keep score. I just kept going. Some afternoons, when the students had gone and the sun dipped low enough to paint the windows gold, Elena and Daniel stayed behind at the piano. As though they didn't plan it, it just happened. Sometimes Elena would pull out a new piece she was working on, stumbling over a difficult passage. Daniel would offer a small suggestion. Other times, Daniel would bring something he had scribbled out late at night. Half a melody, a fragment of a song he didn't know how to finish. Elena would tilt her head, study the notes, and then quietly find a way to weave herself into the missing spaces. Together, they'd built something new. Not just music, but a language all their own. It was never rushed. It was never forced. It was a slow stitching of trust, thread by thread, note by note. Keanu visited often but never stayed long. He would stand in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, listening to the music floating through the air. Sometimes Daniel caught him watching and gave a small nod of gratitude. Keanu always returned the nod, a quiet promise that he understood. He was proud, but he didn't need to say it. He could see it in the way Elena carried herself now, in the way Daniel's hands moved across the keys with a tenderness that hadn't been there before, and the way the music didn't just fill the room, it filled the spaces between them. One evening, after a particularly beautiful impromptu duet, Elena closed the piano softly and turned to Daniel. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "you're a pretty good teacher." Daniel laughed, a real laugh, not weighed down by old guilt. "Must run in the family," he said, grinning. Elena smiled back, a warmth blooming in her chest. For the first time, the word family didn't sting. It felt right. It felt earned. They walked out into the evening together, the air cool and soft against their skin. Rosa was waiting on the stoop, a small bag of groceries at her feet. She rose when she saw them, her face lighting up. Without hesitation, Elena looped her arm through Daniel's and her grandmother's, pulling them close. They walked home together, laughter rising into the night like music. No one said much. They didn't need to. The lessons weren't just about piano anymore. They were about forgiveness, about showing up, about finding harmony, even in the places that had once been silent. And though the past could never be erased, it no longer defined them. They were writing a new song now. Together, Keanu stood back, watching them disappear down the street, a quiet smile on his face. This was why he kept doing it. Not for the headlines, not for the thanks, but for moments like this. Moments when broken chords found a way to blend into something beautiful again. Something worth waiting for. Something that would last. He turned away from the center, the sounds of laughter and music fading behind him. Another story had found its ending, and its beginning, exactly where it needed to. Months later, the seasons shifted, and with them, so did Elena's dreams. The small community music school where she volunteered was hosting its annual recital. This time, Elena wasn't just a participant. She was the headliner. Her name printed in simple black ink on the program. Elena Morgan. For the first time, she let herself carry her full name. No hiding, no shame. And tucked beneath her name was the title of her performance piece. A new composition, one she had written alongside Daniel in the quiet evenings at the piano, weaving his ideas with hers, his old memories with her new beginnings. They called it One Last Song, because it wasn't about an ending. It was about everything they had found when they thought it was too late. The night of the recital, the small auditorium buzzed with quiet excitement. Rosa sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes before the music even started. Daniel sat next to her, clutching the program tightly in his hand like it might disappear if he let go. Keanu slipped into a seat at the side of the room, blending into the shadows, content just to be there. The stage lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start. Elena stepped onto the stage, her black dress simple, her hair pulled back. She carried no sheet music, only herself, only the music inside her. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the first notes poured out, delicate and strong all at once. The melody was different from anything Elena had played before. It wasn't just a song. It was a conversation, a memory, a prayer. The left hand carried a heavy, rich undercurrent. Daniel's voice, his weight, his history. The right hand danced above it, lighter, full of hope. Elena's voice, new and fearless. The two hands wove around each other, sometimes clashing, sometimes echoing perfectly, but always finding their way back to a shared rhythm. In the audience, Rosa held her breath. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him like a river he had been waiting to step into for years. Keanu watched, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He could feel it in the room, the hush, the hearts holding tight to every note. This wasn't just a performance. It was a story. It was love. It was forgiveness, carried across keys, across time, across everything that once seemed impossible to cross. And Elena, sweet, fierce Elena, sat at the center of it all, not erasing the past, but building something beautiful out of it, something only she could create, something only they could share. The music built gently, layer upon layer, as if each note pulled threads from somewhere deep inside her. Elena let herself fall into the piece completely. She stopped thinking, stopped worrying. Her hands knew where to go. Her heart knew what to say. This was not a performance for applause. It was a conversation she had waited her whole life to have. And Daniel was listening. Every note Elena played seemed to reach out to him, not demanding anything, just offering. Daniel leaned forward slightly in his seat, his fingers twitching unconsciously in time with the music. The old instincts were still there. The old love, too. Rosa watched them both, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She could see Daniel's face bathed in the soft light of the stage, tears glistening in his eyes. She could see Elena, not a little girl anymore, but a young woman, building something out of all the broken pieces they had been too afraid to touch for so long. The piece shifted halfway through. The heavy left hand faded, letting the right hand take the lead. Elena improvised here, just a little, the way Daniel had taught her, without ever knowing. She pulled out a lighter melody, almost playful, almost daring. It was hope, set loose into the air. Keanu sat quietly, his hands folded loosely in his lap. He didn't need to know every detail of the past to understand what was happening. Some stories didn't need retelling. They just needed witnessing. As Elena neared the final passages, her touch grew even lighter, almost like a whisper. The room leaned in. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The last measures weren't grand or dramatic. They were small, precious. She ended the song with a simple sequence of rising notes, like someone reaching for the light after a long, dark climb. When the final note faded, Elena sat still for a long moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. No one clapped at first. They couldn't. They were too moved, too caught in the fragile, sacred space she had created. Then, slowly, the applause came, soft at first, then louder, full of something bigger than admiration, full of gratitude, full of understanding. Elena stood and bowed slightly, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes bright. She spotted Daniel in the crowd. Their gazes met. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. He simply pressed his hand against his heart and smiled. A real smile. One she would carry with her, longer than any applause. Elena smiled back. A promise, silent but steady. They had played their one last song. But it was also a beginning neither of them would ever lose again. After the applause faded and the audience began to trickle out into the cool evening, Elena stayed behind on stage, slowly gathering her things. She wasn't in a hurry. Some moments deserved to stretch a little longer. She felt Daniel's presence before she saw him. When she turned, he was standing at the edge of the stage, one hand still pressed lightly over his heart, the other holding something wrapped in soft cloth. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elena smiled and walked to the stairs, meeting him halfway. Daniel unwrapped the cloth carefully, revealing a small, worn metronome. Its wood was scratched, the hinge slightly bent, but it was clearly cherished. "This was mine," he said quietly. "From when I first started playing. It kept me honest when I wanted to rush. Reminded me to stay steady." He offered it to her, his hands trembling slightly. "I want you to have it." Elena looked at the metronome, then up at him. For a moment, her throat tightened too much to speak. She reached out and took it gently, feeling the weight of it settle into her hands like something sacred. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. Daniel smiled, blinking fast. "You taught me to slow down again," he said softly. "You taught me that some things are still worth waiting for." They stood there, in the quiet after the music, in the afterglow of everything they had built. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was theirs. Behind them, Rosa watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth to hold in the tears. Keanu lingered near the back of the auditorium, smiling softly. Another miracle stitched together by patience, forgiveness, and love. Elena tucked the metronome carefully into her bag. She would keep it close, not as a relic of what was lost, but as a promise of what was still being written. A reminder that the best songs, the ones that matter most, are never rushed. They are played slowly, steadily, with every ounce of heart you have. Later that night, back in apartment 3B, Elena placed the metronome on top of the upright piano, just beneath the framed photographs. It looked like it had always belonged there. She sat down at the keys, her fingers finding the opening notes of the song she had written with Daniel. But tonight, she didn't play it alone. Daniel sat beside her, Rosa humming from the kitchen, and Keanu tapping out a quiet rhythm on the window ledge. The music filled the small apartment, filling every crack, every scar, every space that had once been silent. And somewhere deep in her chest, Elena knew this wasn't their last song. It was only the beginning. Some melodies are born in silence. Some are written through broken hands, across broken years, in rooms where no music was ever supposed to survive. But somehow, the heart always remembers the music it came from. Elena didn't need to know every detail of her father's story to feel it. She didn't need to hear every apology or relive every missed moment. She could hear it in the songs he wrote, without ever expecting her to find them. She could hear it in the way he played beside her, careful not to lead too fast, careful to leave room for her to discover her own rhythm. Forgiveness, she learned, wasn't an announcement. It was a song, one played quietly, steadily, not until it filled the empty spaces without even trying. The framed photographs above her piano told part of the story. The metronome on the piano told another. But the real story was still unfolding in the everyday moments. In the shared meals, the quiet laughter, the evenings spent leaning into the keys, side by side. Keanu stood once more in the doorway of apartment 3B, watching it all unfold without needing to be part of it. This was why he had followed the music that day. This was why he had paused outside a battered door and listened, not just for the notes, but for the story waiting to be heard. He smiled, tucked his hands into his jacket pockets, and slipped away into the night, leaving the music behind him. It would carry itself from here. It always did, because love doesn't need perfect timing. It doesn't need perfect words. It only needs a chance, a small, stubborn chance to be heard again. If you have ever found a connection that changed everything, even when you least expected it, share your incredible story below. Because sometimes, the smallest notes carry the biggest songs. Sometimes, the softest beginnings echo the loudest through time. And sometimes, the people we thought we had lost were never truly gone. They were just waiting, like a forgotten melody, ready to be played again. A note, one heart, one homecoming at a time. There is something unexplainable about the way music carries memory. It does not ask permission. It does not wait for the perfect moment. It simply moves through us, stitching together the pieces we thought we had lost. Elena and Daniel's story wasn't built in grand gestures. It was made in the quiet, in small, hazy steps, in the unspoken notes between their words. It was born out of second chances that were never guaranteed but still fiercely hoped for. And in that hope, a new song took root. A song they were still writing, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time. If you have ever found yourself reconnected to someone you thought you had lost, if you have ever discovered that love leaves echoes even after silence, if you have ever realized that the heart remembers even when the mind forgets, then you know exactly what this story means. You know that some connections are not erased by distance, by mistakes, or by time. They are waiting like an unfinished melody, ready for the right hands to find them again. If you have ever found a connection that changed everything, share your incredible story below. You never know who might need to hear it. You never know who might find a piece of their own heart in your words. And sometimes, just sometimes, the stories we dare to share become the songs that someone else needed to hear all along. Thank you for being part of this journey. Because every like, every comment, every story you share keeps these melodies alive, keeps these hearts connected. And if you're still waiting for your own song, your own reunion, your own miracle, keep listening. It might already be on its way. Stay tuned for our next story. While visiting a run-down subway station for a charity shoot, Keanu notices a homeless veteran sitting alone with a battered duffel bag and a harmonica. When he finally sits down to talk, he learns the veteran has been waiting for someone he believes forgot him long ago. What Keanu uncovers is a story of sacrifice, love, and redemption that will stay with you forever. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep listening for the quiet songs. Keep believing in the invisible ties. And never forget, sometimes the softest music is the strongest of all.